This is a fine example of a film I went into with absolutely no expectations. As I've said in the past, I tend not to look at movie release schedules, or if a trailer gets released online, I don't watch it. If I see a trailer, I want to see it in theaters for the first time. There's a certain magic to it. And what that often leads to is I don't really know what movies are coming out aside from big blockbusters. So it's Friday afternoon. It's been a long week at work. I want to go see something in theaters and have some popcorn. And I look at the list and stuff comes up and I'm just like, what is that? I've never heard of that. And I might do a quick Google search to see what the reviews are like, but I just go, you know what? Let's take a chance on it. I have no expectations one way or another. I'm completely open-minded. And the last time that happened was with Late Night with the Devil, which I really loved. So I saw this, it's like Longlegs. That's a weird title, but I looked it up and it's like, wow. A horror thriller film is getting extremely high reviews. That's really rare. Let's go give this a try. So I went to see Longlegs, and I got to admit, it was a really, really good movie. It may even be in contention for movie of the year from my perspective, at least. I basically had no expectations. I know it was getting good reviews, but critics like bad movies all the time. I was worried that it had some really obnoxious political message, and that was the reason why it was doing so well. But no, that wasn't the case. It got the high reviews solely on its own merits. So before we get into Longlegs too much, if you think there's any possibility you might go see this movie, I'd recommend maybe watching this review afterwards, because there's a lot of twists and turns. I'll just say that if you like horror movies, if you like thrillers, if you like psychological movies, movies with a kind of an artistic style to them, and that sort of thing, I think you would really enjoy this. So go watch the movie. It's always important to support good cinema when it comes out, rather than just like another Marvel movie. Like I said with Late Night with the Devil, if you get a chance to watch it in theaters or on streaming, I highly recommend you give it a watch just to support, once again, content creators that actually make good movies. So to start off with, this movie has a lot of things going for it that I generally like. I tend to like anything that has a surreal, dreamlike quality to it, where it's not entirely clear what's real and what's not, and it's almost as if reality's kind of breaking down. How that's often conveyed is with lighting. Pretty much every scene in this movie takes place at night, even if it doesn't entirely make sense for it to take place at night. There's a couple scenes during the day, but it's always very much overcast, I guess because it's Oregon, that makes sense. But it adds that sense of limbo or purgatory to it. This movie makes really good use of liminal spaces, particularly at the police station, where basically every time they're there, it's completely empty other than one or two characters. There are very, very few characters in this movie, and it's unusual to see more than 2 or 3 people on screen at once. And this kind of goes back to the whole liminal spaces thing, where it's so counterintuitive, it's so different than what your everyday experience is. It's inherently unnerving. The music and long shots also really help with that. In fact, this movie I think has a lot of art movie elements to it, and while I generally don't like art movies, I do find often some of the aesthetics of it can really help to establish an atmosphere in a scene, especially in a movie that's a little slow moving like this, but it's slow moving because it's a thriller horror movie and it's about building up tension and a sense of paranoia and stuff like that. So the slow nature has a purpose to it. It's not just there because we have to counter expectations or we have to make this as little like a mainstream film as possible. Our film opens in a format very much reminiscent of Sinister, where there's a little girl with a Polaroid camera who's out behind her house, and this really creepy, bizarre, eccentric man comes up to her and starts talking to her and says that it's her birthday. Now, this guy is played by Nicolas Cage, and I think they did a really good job with Nick Cage in this movie. He put in a great performance, but they didn't rely on him to carry the film. Nick Cage is a good actor, but he can kind of Nick Cage it. He has a very distinct acting style, and you have to be careful that he doesn't just kind of chew up scenery and take over the film. And I think they did a good job with this. Wherein they played into his eccentric, like weird, unnerving aspects of him without making him really the entire focus of the movie. We then cut to the 1990s where we have newly recruited agent Lee Harker, and there is a serial killer known as Longlegs, who is striking all across the West Coast. Now they're going out and canvassing for the guy. They're just going through the neighborhood trying to find if there's any sort of evidence, and she has a very strong intuition that the Longlegs is hiding in a house nearby where they pull over. Her partner just decides to humor her, and he goes up and knocks on the door to immediately get shot. She runs into the house and looks around for him, but almost immediately collapses. It then cuts to a scene where she's being tested for psychic abilities, which are inconclusive, but she does a lot better than what could be expected. They have her pick number. They pick a number from 0 to 100 10 times, and she gets 5 out of 10, which is not 100%. It's not even like 80%, but that's a lot higher than you would expect if she was just guessing. Because of those abilities, they decide to assign her to the case of the killer Longlegs. As the case has reached a standstill, no one can really figure out what his method is. No one can really figure out who he is or anything like that. He's basically a ghost. And they think maybe her abilities will help her to get some kind of lead in the case, because at this point in time, they really don't have anything else. So his method of killing is very weird. Basically, what happens in every situation is the father freaks out and kills the family, and then they find a coded message left at the scene of the crime afterwards with Longlegs, signed Longlegs. However, they can't find any forensic evidence that a man was ever there. The only real way they have to determine that this is one person is the modus operandi is always the same, and the letter is left there, but they have no idea how he's doing this. How is he getting the father to kill them? It doesn't make any sense. So Lee gets brought to the police station. It looks like in the middle of the night, and she gets handed the case file. We then have a cool scene of her, in I forget it was Parks and Rec or whatever it is, where you have the guy who puts all the pins up on the board connecting everything together. You have a scene a bit like that, but more kind of surreal and unnerving. And she very quickly figures out that in all cases, the family had one daughter, 9 years old, who was born on the 14th of the month, and all the murders occurred within 6 days before or after the birthday itself. So she puts it all on a calendar, and when she starts to kind of fill it in, she finds out that it forms the occult symbol, an inverted triangle. There's one date missing, though, which she predicts will be the next child to die. Meanwhile, we also get a very unnerving scene where Lee's at her rented cabin, and she hears something in the woods, and she goes outside and comes back in to find that she's received a letter from Longlegs. She figures out that the code corresponds to passages in the Book of Revelation, and she manages to decode the letters, which basically tell them to go to a particular farm of one of Longlegs' victims, and that they have to follow the X's. So they follow the X's and they find a doll that has a weird metal orb in it. Lee, when she looks at the orb, begins to have weird disturbing psychic flashes of snakes and stuff like that. Something I've noticed, just as an aside, when I started watching Clint's Reptiles, is almost all the snakes that are used in movies are ball pythons. And I had never really noticed this before, but if you look carefully, it's almost always ball pythons, be it in Indiana Jones or something else. Probably because ball pythons are big, hefty-looking snakes, but they're not so big they're hard to handle, and they aren't dangerous, and they don't have venom. Just kind of an interesting side note. Lee begins to theorize that there's been a doll left at each scene. It's some sort of voodoo thing, or she is not entirely sure, but the orb within them has some sort of evil energy that is controlling the family. Her partner doesn't really believe it. He's very skeptical about it, but he admits there's not really an alternative explanation at this point in time. They start to think that maybe her mother has something to do with it. Her mother is exceedingly religious. She's a schizoid, and she lives by herself with basically no interaction with the outside world. Lee goes to visit her, and we have a kind of a creepy scene where The mother asks her if she's saying her prayers, and Lee says, I never say my prayers. The prayers you taught me are really creepy. And the mother just starts laughing and says, yes, prayers don't do anything to basically to keep them away. So she tries to grill her mother. Her mother just basically gives her, you can't handle the truth, but I haven't thrown anything away, so go check out your room. So she goes to her room. She finds a box full of Polaroids, revealing her to be the girl from the beginning of the film, which I think was probably pretty obvious by this point in time. So she gives the picture of Longlegs to the FBI. They're able to quickly find him and take him in. He asks to talk to her, so she goes down and confronts him in the interrogation room. He indicates that he knows her previously and has some sort of relationship with her, perhaps even beyond what happened at the beginning of the movie, and says that he serves the man downstairs. And by this point in time, it's very clear that he serves Satan. And that's kind of cool. We don't have him being some kind of weird Christian or evangelical or millenarian or something like that. This is kind of a throwback to the satanic panic of the 80s and 90s. And it's kind of cool to see a horror movie where it's just Satan who's the bad guy. She tries to ask him about some other stuff. He tells her that her mother was involved in his crimes. And then he says, "Hail Satan," and bashes his head in on the metal table until he dies. Lee does one of the few rational things in this movie and takes another FBI agent with her. They go to the farmhouse of her mother. The other agent stays in the car to provide her with backup if needed. And she goes into the house to look for her mother. While she's looking for her mother, she looks out a window and sees her mother sneaks up on the other FBI agent and blows her head off with a shotgun. She runs out to confront her mother, and she sees her mother with a doll that looks like Lee, and she shoots the doll, and then Lee passes out. So then we get her memories unlocked. So what wound up happening is after Longlegs came and had her take the picture, he came by that night and was going to kill Lee and her mother. And when she begs for mercy, Longlegs gives her a choice. Either she becomes his accomplice and helps him carry out the murders, or he kills her daughter. So she decides to serve him, and by extension, Satan, and she becomes a honeypot. She pretends to be a nun, claiming that she's giving them a gift from the church or something like that, and she brings in the doll that has the satanic presence in it into the house, and once it's in the house, it possesses the father and gets him to kill the rest of the family. And it was actually her birthday that was the missing one from the inverted triangle. She then remembers that she had promised to go to the birthday party of her sister, the daughter of her partner, and she rushes there as she realizes this is the last killing that Longlegs needs to complete the triangle, to complete the circle. Well, not the circle, the inverted triangle, as it were. So yeah, she gets there. They've unwrapped the doll. Her mother is sitting on the couch, and it's too late. The father's already been possessed, and he goes into the kitchen and kills his wife. He comes back out, and Lee is forced to shoot him in order to protect the daughter. Her mother then takes out a dagger and is going to try to kill the kid as well. So Lee winds up also shooting her. And she turns to Ruby and says, "We got to get out of here." She attempts to shoot the doll, but it appears she's out of ammunition. Now, I'm not sure if she's actually out of ammunition or if something supernatural is going on. I didn't really count, and I think she had multiple guns because I think she lost her automatic in a scuffle, and it's her backup revolver. I don't think she fired 6 times, but I could be wrong, or it could be a gun that has fewer than 6 rounds. But she's unable to shoot the doll, and the movie ends on a very ambiguous note, with her staring at the doll, remaining frozen in place, whereas Ruby stands behind her, also completely emotionless. So we're very much left up to interpretation. What happened? Is she being possessed? Is she going to be the next Longlegs killer? Is she going to be the one who kills Ruby and completes the triangle? Is it just her undergoing some sort of PTSD or stress from having killed her mother and her partner? We don't entirely know. I think it's the closest implication is Satan is still controlling her to some way or another, although her mother did blow up her personal doll earlier, so I don't really know what that means. This movie doesn't really provide us with a ton of answers beyond the fact that something supernatural is going on, that Satan's behind it, and the whole thing is part of some ritual. Now, whether or not completing the ritual does anything, like if it summons Satan into the world or it leads to something else, we aren't really sure. But I think it does a good job with the ambiguity. The only thing I would change is I think it should have been more ambiguous as to whether or not there was actually supernatural elements. That's something I often like in horror movies, is if it's very ambiguous as to whether the supernatural elements are real or they're just the result of paranoia or coincidence or something like that. It can very clearly point in one direction, but I feel like this movie maybe does too much to confirm it. That might be necessary, though, because the way that the families are being killed is just kind of so bizarre. But unless we want to go down the route of some really weird hypnotism or people being kidnapped and given LSD to be brainwashed, it kind of has to have some sort of a supernatural cause to it. But that's just kind of one of my very few, I guess you could say, criticisms of this movie. It's actually surprising how short this film is. This film is only 100 minutes. I guess that is longer than your standard movie, but it felt a lot longer than that. But in a good way. In a good way. Like, once again, it's very surreal. It's very dreamlike. Time just seems to move at its own speed in Lordran. The flow of time is colluded in Lordran and also in the state of Oregon, apparently. But yeah, this is a really solid film. It's a visual treat. It's unnerving. Overall, they just do a really good job with it. I might have to go back and take a look at some of the other movies that he's done. If they're in a similar style, I think that I'd enjoy them. Anyways, that's all I have to say. I think it's a contender for movie of the year. I absolutely love this movie. 100% recommend that you go and see it.